point, you should have both R and RStudio downloaded onto your computer and ready to run. So let's start with this question of what is R? Because R is two things, but we're going to use the term R, or I guess the letter R, in only one. R is both a software and a language. It is a computer programming language which you can use the R software to operate. We don't want to use the R software. What we want to use is RStudio. R software is a little cumbersome for beginners. It's not very user-friendly. RStudio, though, is a free supplement. It's a graphical user interface, which makes the R language a little easier to use. I still use it. It made the basic sort of components of programming a lot simpler. It puts the data in the screen in sort of a digestible way for you. And so I think it's really useful. And so we're going to write in R. We're going to write in R as a language using RStudio. So whenever we start class, what we're going to do is open RStudio. But what we're writing there is the language R. There's a lot of more history about R, why it's called R. I don't think that that's entirely necessary for an introductory class. It's not a history that I've delved into. You can find it online. But that's all that we sort of really need as a background on R as a language. So I'm going to go down here and open this program, RStudio. All of this is going to be done on a Mac. If you have a PC, the steps may look a little bit different, but I think that that is something that you can navigate on your own. So I'm going to open RStudio. We're going to see the default way that it opens. And it's going to open with three separate windows on the screen. We've got this big window here. We've got a window up here, and we've got a space down here. And what we want to do is open up a fourth space. And the way to do that is by clicking on these two little tiles in the sort of center of the screen in the top right here. And that's going to drop down a fourth window. Right, so now we have four spaces on our screen. And I'm going to sort of even them out by dragging them like this. Right, you can see that you can adjust the screen a little bit to make it fit exactly what you're doing. But so let's first describe what these four sections of the screen are. So the top left corner here is our text editor. We can write up here. We can write anything we want in this space. And this is the space where we can usually write our code, but right now I'm just writing gibberish. Right, so the upper left corner, as you're looking at the screen, is going to be your text editor. To the right here is called your environment. You can see that the environment is empty right now. And what the environment contains is all of the data that you have available to you currently in your session. So you can work with multiple data files at the same time in R at any moment in RStudio. And this is where they're going to be listed. And now, just for sort of a point of clarification, whenever I talk about a data set, what I'm essentially meaning is a worksheet, a set of columns and rows. So Excel is the most common sort of form of a data set. Right? You can think about any workbook. This is a data set. It has rows here, and it has columns across the top. And we could fill this in with data, and we can load this data set into R and use it there to do sort of more advanced manipulations. And so when we load data into R, it will appear in our environment. And so to demonstrate that now, let me quickly load some data in. R comes with data built into its programming environment. And this is data that's useful for class examples. This isn't the type of data you're going to use to write a final paper in a class or a capstone. It's data that's useful, though, as an example, because we all have it. We all have the same data when we're opening the program. And so it's useful and easy to load in. And so I'm going to write the first command in R that we'll use, which is just used to load in data. And that is just data. So data is the command that we're using to load something in. And then we can write in whatever data frame we want. And so one data is called cars, which is a really common sort of starter data frame. And so if I highlight this line in my text editor and I click run, I now have this data of cars loaded in. And I can look at that by writing view, another command, cars, and it'll pop up here, and this is my data. Right? It has 50 rows, it says 50 observations here, and there are 2 columns, 2 variables. And so here in the upper left corner, upper left box, what we're going to do is we're going to write out commands, and when we want to look at our data, this is where it's going to pop up. And we'll always have the data we're using listed here on the right. We can load in more data if we want, just to show how that looks, right? I can load in this data frame, air passengers, right? And now we have both air passengers and cars available to us. And we can see what that looks like, right? It's just one column of the number of air passengers, right? And so now we've got air passengers, we have cars, and all of that is going to be listed in the upper right corner. The bottom left corner is called our console. And our console is going to show us all of the work that we've done. So when I ran these 4 commands, they all come down into the console to show that they have been performed. If I have some kind of output from my command, it'll often show up in the console. So I could run a command head. And don't worry about memorizing these different commands. We'll practice them week over week. These are just sort of simple beginner commands to begin showing what the R language looks like. If I run the command head, which pulls out the top 5 lines of my data frame, those top 5 lines will come down here. All of the work that I'm doing will show up in the console. Okay, so the console is the bottom left corner. This is where the history of what we've done is going to show up. In the environment is all of the data that we're using currently. And here is the text editor where we want to write out our commands. The bottom right is plots. It has a few different uses, but one of the most common is going to be, it's going to be where a graph is going to show up if we create a graph. And so I can create a simple graph of cars by writing plot cars, and that will come and show up in the bottom right corner. And so at the same time, I can see the commands that I've already used, I can see the code that I've written in the top left corner, I can see the data that I have in the top right, and I can see the plot that I've drawn. And so each of these 4 quadrants of the screen have their own uses. When we're writing code, we can write the code directly into the console. If I wanted to plot cars again, I could write that directly down here. I'll get rid of this plot, I'll clean it out, and I can write it again directly into the console. And I can make it execute in the console directly. But I generally want to write my code up here in the text editor, because what this text editor is called an R script. And I can save that R script, and I can save all of the code that I've written. So when you're writing a paper for a class, you generally don't open a Word document, write it out, and then print it and not save. That would be the equivalent of writing your code into the console and then closing R. You don't get to keep any of the code that you've written. You generally want to write it into this document because you may be writing code across multiple sessions. And you can save that script and use that in the future as part of the building block of future sessions. And so just for one example, I can open up a script that I've written in the past where I graphed all of the hotels in New Orleans. And so I have all of this code pre-written. And so I can select all of this and execute it. And without having to redo anything, I can reproduce my graph. And I can make adjustments. I can use this as the basis for a different graph in the future. Writing these lines of code took a lot of time, but now that I have it, I have that code forever. I never have to rewrite this code. And so you can reuse and recycle code as you're developing new projects. So that's why it's so important to save it as you're going. And so if I wanted to take this new code that I'm writing in this new script, I can save it, I can put it wherever I want, I can save it into my class file, my class folder for this class. I'll call it class example. And now I have this. And if I close this script, I'm closing everything that I have here. But I can go back, and because I saved it, I don't have to recreate it. It's there waiting for me. Right. And now I can build off it and do something new if I want. There's one other type of text editor that we want to use. So R script is sort of the more basic R script, which is just writing in R. What we're going to use a lot in the class is called a markdown document. And markdown differs from other types of documents you write in sort of a key way. Most of you use word processing to write your papers. You might use a different program, Pages. They all work sort of similarly. And with Word, what it would be called is you see what you get. As you're writing the document, everything you're writing will appear exactly as you're writing it. That differs from a markdown document because you're changing the formatting as you're writing. And then when you publish the document, or you sort of, in a sense, print it, the document changes. It absorbs the sort of formatting that you're listing with what you're writing, and it creates a new and a different document for you. And that's probably unclear, but we'll clarify it as we go. So if I wanted to create a markdown document, what I would do is or if I wanted to create a new script, I can create a new script anytime, right? I go up to this left corner and I hit this plus mark, and I can add new R scripts. And I can also add a markdown document. And so when I click on markdown document, it's going to pop up this screen. And you may want to add a title for the document you're creating. I'll call it class example, and I'll list myself as the author. And I want to use HTML as the document output. So I press OK, and I get this new document. Right, and so you can see that the R script is a blue circle with an R, and the markdown document is a red circle. And that's sort of the easy way to tell them apart if they're both open in your environment. You can see you have multiple documents, multiple text editors open at the same time. And you can work across these as you go. So with the markdown document, what you're doing is you're both writing code and text together and blending them together. And so in the next session, the next video, I'll go into more detail about what Markdown is and how we want to use it.